Okay, this is Perp Tech 10. I'm your host, David Vizart. Still trying to get my breath back here. I've just been rushing around, and hell, I needn't have worried. We're 2 minutes early. Now, you could see what I was going to do on the introduction there. A rule thing for the members for the cylinder head challenge, and a deal on some hopefully up to the minute exhaust tech that many of you might not know. Now, I'm not going to get into too much now because being as I'm early, we still haven't got many people viewing. So I'll just meander for a while. Now, just before this, I was trying to keep track of the Artemis launch. I saw the first 2.5 minutes. It looked like it went well. But after that, I had to get cracking on getting stuff for this. Can anybody update us? Did it go all right? Have you watched it up until this moment? It's a big step forward, and hell, I hope it goes all right. We've got a lot of money invested. Whilst we're going through this deal here, I'll tell you one of the big reasons that they're not dwelling on why we're going back to the moon now, right? But I'll save that until we've got a few more people. Now, do you have a question? I've been asking the entrants of the cylinder head competition how much they think a fair entry fee is. And I'm amazed at the results I've had in so far, between $375 and $400. And this is from the entrants. They're willing to pay that. So that's good. But I do want to keep on about you guys sending in cash, check, whatever, or I'm going to try and arrange this credit card to Greg, both for the cylinder head challenge and the dyno challenge. Now, I'm going to be talking about the dyno challenge extensively here. Andy covered a lot of it yesterday, and that was good. He outlined what we were going to do. At this point, I'm going to say we've got 9 challengers. All of them are selected competent engine builders. So we've got 3 Chevys, 3 Mopar, 3 Ford. And it's going to be what we hope to be the trend for all the future shootouts that we do. And we should get better and better at this, but we've got very little space for people to be viewers. But if we rotate them right, we probably get, I don't know, 30, 40, even 50 people through at certain times to see what's going on. Now, this shootout is on April 16th at Greg's shop in Charlotte. Go to Greg's website. You'll see that at the end of most videos, right? His it's I believe it's race engine challenge. Yeah, Google it and you'll find the deal there, and you'll be able to see if you can make it. We should have a food truck there, and I've said that before. And I'll be there autographing books. It'll be a $25 fee to go into the dyno cell. I'll be taking phone calls live. I'll tell you the number when we get to it. We'll be broadcasting this live, so I'll announce that as we broadcast it. Now, is there anything else? Not yet. I'm going to do the exhaust stuff first. Can everybody hear me okay? Let's see if that pulls up a deal there. I can see my green light flashing, but that doesn't mean you are receiving it. So just tell me if you're receiving okay, right? And we'll go from there. Right, so I guess we are. We've got just a ton of stuff up already. Nate, 18,000 miles an hour and velocity over 80 miles up. So far, so good. Good. Rocket went great. Looks like we. Joe Carroll. No, you didn't pay 300 for that. It was either 400 or 600, right? I'm guessing linemen make so much money they can't keep track of it. Now, am I right? Invasive coyote. Hi, invasive. Walter Mucha. Hi, Charles. Right. Charlie said something up here. Yep. Charlie gets a bigger audience than I do. Hey, Charlie, well done. Want to start before I get to the members only stuff, which I'm going to do a bit later on. I want to start on exhaust because there still seems to be a lot of, how shall I say, not funded technically stuff going around. A modern engine, a modern race engine, the success of it almost depends on the exhaust. If the exhaust doesn't do what it should do, then the camshaft can't do what it could do, and the heads can't do what they could do. So that means a mistake on the exhaust depletes performance potential from the camshaft and the head, and there's no way around it. So let me ask you a question here. When you test a V8 exhaust system on the dyno, changing the primary lengths doesn't seem to have much difference, right? You can change the primary length sometimes as much as 6 inches and not see any real difference. And then when you change them more than that, you might see a gain somewhere and a loss somewhere else. So over the rev range you're using, it might just be still about the same average horsepower. Now, what does make a difference is the secondary. But before I get onto that, I would like to see if any of you know why on a 4-cylinder engine, changing the length makes a big difference. On a V8, it doesn't. On the V8s like we build, changing the exhaust length on the primary doesn't have much effect. 2 things I want to ask you here. If you know why, for sure you can give me a reason. And one other reason, I've forgotten it. Why it's different to a 4-cylinder engine, right? Now, I want you to think about that. And if you've got any idea, put it up here, and I'm going to watch. And if you've got it right, I want you to call me and tell me what the reason is, and all of us will hear. So go for it. Do any of you know the reason why? And I'm going to watch that. Right now, which is, I don't know which is the last one here. Yeah, obviously it's the bottom one. Video cylinder heads. I like a small, fast exhaust port. There's a lot to be said for that. I can tell you now, and this ties in with what young Charlie is saying here. Too big an exhaust port, and your torque figures can plummet, literally everywhere, not just in the low and mid range. Charlie, you missed the question due to a call. Tough. God, I'm hard on my friends. Any more people want to? Well, Bob, 12F. Exhaust pulse timing is different on a 4-cylinder to a V8. Do you want to call and expand on that? The number to call will be, let me turn this thing on. 704. Now let's start again. This is my business only number. No calls other than what I'm authorizing. Right. The number is 704 675 4447. And I'm waiting for your call. Yeah, you see, Joe, who tries to work everything to the limit, spent a third of the time working on exhaust systems to get his engine competition engines up to where he believed they were making the best results. And that right there, a dyno test guy proves my point, or rather supports my point of view. It is all about exhaust and then other. Tom at ZQ1. V8 has diluted intake signals, so the exhaust signal pulling on the overlap is diluted. Yeah, that might be part of the case, but not all of it. They need to scavenge more efficiently because of both velocity and pulse, isn't that of a V8? No, that's not so. That's Alan. 4-cylinder engines can have just as much of a pulse signal as a V8, assuming the compression and the cam and all that are, and the breathing per cube are it, right? I heard Darren Morgan say you can't really tune one cylinder. I think that might be, there may be more to it than just that. Darren may be trying to put something over in conjunction with that. So I'm going to ignore that because I'm sure we're not looking at it in the right context there. But anyway, and I say that because not very often that Darren's wrong, right? The reason is a 4-cylinder have more room to make a better tuned exhaust to maximize performance. No, not quite. Forgive me if I'm off topic. IR Weber setups, are they limited to LSA on the cam, or is that only when you have a poor exhaust system? You know, Nate, I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there. forgive me if it's off the topic, IR Weber setups are limited to lobes separation angle on the cam? Or is that only when you have poor exhaust flow? That question actually, I see what you're trying to ask, but it doesn't actually, it's not a question you can answer because they're not related in the way you're discussing there. That's something for another deal. Dash ripro whatever. Does it come down to intake valve diameter? No. There are 4-cylinder engines out there with bigger valves than V8s. Floyd's Garage. David was talking about the paint trick for tube length and termination and a termination box. No, that's not it either. It's a good try, but let's go down a bit more. If we don't have an answer in the next few moments, I'll tell you why. Time for a sip of coffee. Okay, I'm going to tell you why. Here, I'm assuming we have a 2-plane crank in the V8. And of course, the 4-cylinder engine will be a single-plane crank, 2 up, 2 down. Now, if you look at the firing coming out of oh, excuse me a moment. Just coming to the end of what I think was a cold. If you look at the firing pulses out of a 4-cylinder engine, they go 1, 4, 2, 3, or 1, 3, 4, 2. And those firing pulses are 4 cycles, 720, 4 and 720, 2 is 360, 180 apart. I should be able to do that off the top of my head. 180 degrees apart, absolutely even. Now, if we look at a V8, they don't. They go, a 1 cylinder will fire, then there will be a fairly substantial gap, 180 or 240 degrees. Then the next cylinder will fire, and the next cylinder to fire will only be 90 degrees behind the first one. So the exhausting is going on while the second cylinder releases. So at the collector, we've got a pulse, and then halfway through that pulse, the next pulse arrives. Whereas in a 4-cylinder engine, one pulse goes through and the next pulse follows it. It never overlaps it. That's why you get that V8 rumble, because it sounds louder on the 2 cylinders that overlap than it does on the other. So you get a boom, 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 like my sound effects. Speed that up and it'll sound like a cup car. Now, here's what happens. If you get the pulse right on, say, we'll say it's a Chevy, on cylinder 5, then that exhaust pulse that starts on cylinder 7 will scavenge through the number 7 cylinder, get that going whilst the 5 is still trying to go, and it will scavenge from the 5 cylinder. That's why when you port a manifold, you need to have a sharp edge on the number 7 cylinder side of the adjoining web, and a radius on the 5 side. This is to slow down or cut the effect of the pressure wave on 7 in the overlap, and ease the amount that can go down 5 without being robbed. Now, here's what happens. If you change all the lengths, if you have even exhausts and you start changing the lengths, right? What happens is for the 5 and 7, and to a certain extent 1 and 2, because they are adjacent like this, 1 and 2. What happens is you will tune one cylinder in and the other one out. So when you change lengths, all you do is change the combined effect of them all. So at least 2 cylinders, and to an extent, probably a lesser extent, probably 4. That's 1 and 2, 5 and 7. So what happens is some cylinders get better, others get worse. So you can change the length up and down, but the overall power doesn't change much. However, when it comes to the secondaries, the change is big, right? Change 3 inches, 6 inches. You can see that on the dyno. The times I see people with stubby exhaust like this or none, and I think, boy, they're giving away 20 or 30 horsepower. Could be 20 or 30 horsepower. All I got to do is adjust that length. To give you an idea, a good starting point is about 18 inches from the middle of the collector. That's a good starting point. If you've only got the collector as it comes on the collector itself, the merge part of the collector, and you add 16 to 18 inches of that, you'll feel it, right? You won't need a dyno to tell you whether you're doing better. You will feel it. Now, let's go to the 4-cylinder, right? It's 180. So the pulses go boom, 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 and they follow each other into the collector. Change the length on those, you'll know about it, right? Now, here's a piece of information that a lot of aftermarket foreign car header manufacturers should know. If you're making a header for anything under 8,000 RPM, a 4-into-1 header is by far the worst type you can have compared with a 4-into-2-into-1. A 4-into-2-into-1 compared with a 4-into-1 at say 2,000 RPM is like adding a 5th cylinder to your 4-cylinder engine. At 8,000 RPM, the two of them can match power, right? But the 4-into-2-into-1 will always beat that 8-into-1 for torque all the way up until you get to 7,500, and then they're about the same, and then 8,000, the 4-into-1 wins out. So unless you're building an engine where you consistently use more than 8,000 RPM, you should be using a 4-into-2-into-1, right? I did a heavy duty practice deal on that. And Unity Motorsports, that's young Andy, has just posted the Ford versus Mopar versus Chevy small block dyno challenge announcement for 2026 with yours truly. So after we finish this, go and check out his video there. He's done a lot of looking into the details and things like this, how you can get to it, what's going to be there, whose engines are there, who the guys are entering, etc. Right, very worthwhile. We filmed that last night, so it's hot stuff. Go see it after you've watched this. And I'm finishing at 9 o'clock now. So this comes down to the point: how accurate should you have your primary lengths on a V8 header? Should they all be identical for the best result? Well, if somebody told you that, they're talking a load of hot air. Actually, the best setup for a V8 two-plane crank exhaust is to tune every pipe to the cylinder, right? To the cylinder. And what's the best way to do that? With an in-cylinder pressure measuring device. What you do is you pick on a length that is calculated right for the RPM you want it to tune at. And you build a system with, say, all the pipes about that length. It doesn't have to be, as long as one's that length. Right now, and then what you do then is you find out where the peak exhaust pulse hits the cylinder at where your torque is, right? It should be optimum. It should hit the valve just as it's just opened. Now, what you then do is you go to the next cylinder and you find out where that one's hitting. Now, it's going to be either too soon, too late, or the same. It's got those three options. Well, if it's too soon, you make that pipe longer. If it's too late, you make it shorter. You go all around all the cylinders until they all hit that exhaust valve at the same crank angle. Now, if you have a good idea of what it was to start with, you will find that all of them will fall into sync. Now, the only mistake you can make is that the torque peak may be a little too high or a little too low in terms of RPM, but the exhaust will be optimum for that RPM, right? So if somebody says, hey, my exhaust system, I just paid $6,000 for it, the guy got every length within a half an inch. Well, unfortunately, that's not what you needed, right? No, let me rephrase that. Unfortunately, it is not what the engine needed. Now, let me be clear here. Nothing is ever what you want on the engine. It's what the engine wants. You have to find what the engine wants and do it that way. There is no other way of doing it. So anyway, Tom, Z1Q, doesn't what you're suggesting depend on the firing order and the header design, not so much if it is a 4-cylinder or V8? No, sorry, Tom. This is a very distinct thing. When I was designing Pinto cams for Kent Cams way back, this has got to be 1990-ish, and I worked with a British header company and Kent Cams, and they footed the bill for me to test anything I wanted in terms of cams and headers, right? Always and how do we know we're successful? Torque per cube, volumetric efficiency, both of those guide you. For the engine we were dyno testing, we knew that if we could hit 1.5 cubes per cubic inch with the compression ratio we had, we were, in terms of effectiveness, we were in Formula One territory. Well, we did get to 1.5, just about. Now, our 4-into-1 exhausts were only superior when it was over 8,000 RPM, and we dyno tested up to about 10. Below, if we're talking 7,500 for a street motor, but maybe shifted 8, a 4-to-2-into-1 was by far it wasn't nominally better. It was hugely better for a street deal. Literally, in the range you drive in on the street, it was up by 25% on foot pounds, better driving, etc. Now, evenly spaced exhaust vents on a 4-cylinder compared with the V8 bank. Yeah, the V8 bank doesn't have evenly spaced cylinder unless it's a single plane crank V8. Then you can have if you're not revving over 8,000, you can have 4-to-2-to-1 headers both sides. Boy, you want to see the mid-range torque that will make, but not many people do that. All the single plane cranks I've seen have been 4-to-1 headers, and none of them have revved significantly higher than 8 or 9,000. They get the wrong headers on. They are not utilizing it properly. Floyd's garage. I was thinking of the paint trick where the paint burns off too. Now, I'm not sure that that's got as much relevance as it might seem. I tried that. The guy that put me onto it was my friend Dick, the F1 engine designer, right? He designed Jimmy Clark's F1 Coventry Climax V8, which won him the World Championship. And he said that he'd heard of it. And I can't remember if he said he'd tried it. But I suspect that there's something in it. But I also suspect reading it might be another thing altogether. So that's my thoughts on there. And that really is an opinion. Remember, I always say I don't have an opinion. I've got a dyno. Well, I've never tried that on a dyno for real. So it is one of those rare occasions where you're getting an opinion. Take it or leave it. That's my thought on it. Speed that up sounds like a cop car. Headathon. Sparky motive. Headathon. Sparky, I'm not sure what you mean there. But anyway, no one's called me yet. I'm holding onto this phone, see if anyone's going to call. No. Megaphone. Yes. Oh my God. The trick of a lifetime. They do affect the exhaust. And there is the reverse cone megaphone. Now, I heard from a friend of mine who was around in the days when that was invented. And he was at the meet where the original one was done, racing his, I think it's a 500 Triumph. And do you know what the reason for putting it on was? Nothing to do with performance. It was put on so that the end of the megaphone wouldn't split, because that's what's happening. These 2-cylinder Triumph engines were not, both pistons came up and went down at the same time. They vibrated like hell. Can't balance out. No matter what you do with the balance weights, you cannot balance out the secondary out of balance. No, you can't even balance out the primary either. So that stopped them cracking. Then after, he said, I swear the bike went better with those on, or words to that effect. I've tried megaphones on the dyno, and yes, you can get them to work, and yes, they don't work. It seems a very scattered results. Now, I know there were Japanese motorcycle manufacturers which did lots of tests with reverse cone megaphones on 2-stroke engines, and they got them down to the point where they were really getting these things that cracked the whip. I read about it and what they did and the measurements they did, and boy, was it complicated. So I can't comment any further on there because I am not up to speed on it. But on a 4-stroke engine, you can get it to work. I used one on my Mini, and I swear at best, within the range that I used on the track, I may have seen 1 horsepower. All I can say, what I put on was better than what I had. That's all. But I tried lots of different things, and that's the best I could see, just an edge. So that's all I've got to say on that. Okay, DP4 Racing. I have 48 IDA Webers on a Chevy 350 road race car. Should I bore them out to 51 millimeters? You know what? You don't realize it here, but you're taking on more than you can see there. Just boring them out incurs other problems that require machining that are difficult to achieve. Now, let me tell you something. The butterfly is not the primary restriction. No, let me start again. That was wrong. The bore size is not the primary restriction. The butterfly is. And what you've got there is a shaft, 5/16 or so wide, with a 16th wide butterfly, with some screws which have heads on them and bits sticking out the other end, which cause a terrific drag, right? Next, when you go up to the boosters and the Venturi, you're looking at, on an IDA, you're looking at a pretty efficient booster. And the Venturi is very efficient. So what you're doing is you're boring it out 1 millimeter and installing a butterfly, which is still very inefficient. What you need to do is get your butterfly and sharpen the edge, right? So it's still got a little tiny sealing edge on it, but sharpen the other edge and the trailing edge. Then when you get to the butterfly shaft, the bit that's got the threads in, you can leave that, but the other bit that hasn't got threads in, put dome-headed Allen screws in, right? So that you've got rid of half of the shaft and you replace the screws with dome-headed screws, which are very streamlined. Use Allen ones. When you install it, put Loctite on them, and it's best to put some fairly grippy Loctite. I mean, I've used red and blue. Take your pick there. The red, you're going to destroy the shaft before you get it out, most likely, unless you put a very fine drop on. The blue usually gets the job done. Tighten it up, and that will give you about 18 CFM more, whereas boring it out is going to give you 2 or 3 more. And what you may do is alter where the position where the slots and the holes operate. And of course, you've got to make a bigger butterfly. Don't do it. If you want to go to more flow, clean up the boosters, the leg that goes across, clean that up. Oh, very important thing. The top of the booster, which of course, as you know, comes out above the trumpets, cutter, a 60-degree cutter, and go down and cut that until it's knife edged, right? That's very important. You will increase the signal. Now, 48 IDAs, right? You are probably going to need, for a good power curve, you're probably going to need 38 Venturis. Do not be tempted to put in big Venturis because they don't work, right? And I usually start with 38 on a deal like this. Sometimes on a setup that's really good, it may take 40s, but that's rare. I usually find 38s most of the time, 39-degree ones, or 38 bored out and trimmed, about 15% of the time, and then about 1% might be 40. I think that's happened once. So right, Floyd's garage. Not sure, but may change speed. No, real knowledge. BRAIN. Nate. So same with my IDF downdraft Webers. That's a nice little carburetor. I use a pair of those on my 1000 Anglia. Right, 139 horsepower from 1000 cc's, 12-to-1 compression, and it made that power at about 9600. And we on the track, and it carried on well. On the track, Colin, who drove the car, would turn it to about 10.5 for the shift. God, it screamed, that thing. Then I had a megaphone exhaust on it, and it was 4-into-1 because all we ever used was between 8 and 10.5. It wouldn't run under 6, literally. If you let the clutch in with a bit of throttle and it was doing 6, it would stall. It's 6.1, spin the tires. Quick FC7. Have you done any headwork for inline 4 motorcycles, DV? Yes, I have. Hondas, right? Haven't done any though, except for one of my class attendants on Honda motorcycle engines since like 1998 to 2000. I would love a parts list to get me a 383 small block Chevy at 500 horsepower. You want a radically lumpy idle. You realize to get 500 horsepower, I've got to make a mistake speccing your cam to get a radical lumpy idle with good weight, good cruise. A radical lumpy idle means you have too much cam, or you've got it too tight a lobe centerline angle. Right? It's not a very good cam. Those, look, I tell you what. Here's what we'll do, Stephen. We will do a phone call and I will spec you out a cam as close as I possibly can and all the other parts, but you've got to be a member, right? You be a member, ask me for this in a members only meet. I will give you the number. You can call me up and I will go right through your engine spec, but you've got to be a member, and I expect you to be a member for at least 6 months. That's when you'll get your free book, which when I've autographed it will be worth about $100. So get to be a member. Right, what else? Where are we here? Have you done any headwork? Yes, I've done. Just Racing Performance in Phoenix, Arizona is watching. I own several of your books. Thank you. You're very welcome, Just. Right? I've got a feeling. Would I have heard of your company? I used to live in Tucson, Arizona. Had some very good friends there. Unfortunately, most of them have passed away now. Don Daughter, thin down the throttle shaft too. Yeah, didn't I? Yeah, Don, I just said that, didn't I? Okay. Charlie, can we have an argument one day? Why is it we always agree? See what Charlie says? Never cam for sound, right? If you're a performance enthusiast, and I'm talking about any type of performance, be it mileage, be it best drivability, be it best torque and horsepower, you never compromise by making it sound like what you want, unless you want it to sound like you want, but it won't go as well as if you let the engine tell you what it wants to go like you'd like. Right? Now, okay, I got a question. I have a method of making an engine lope with an absolutely solid, good performance cam. I haven't patented it yet. Anybody want to talk to me about a patent and doing that? Maybe comp cams, because I'm sure you won't want to compete against it, because your thumper cams will cease being sold because you won't need one, right? And you can put it on any engine. Doesn't matter. You don't have to even strip your engine. You can put it on and an hour later drive away, probably less. All right, David V. Lawn or Vlon. 4351. See, I didn't get that bit wrong, did I? Did you use unequal length headers, primers in the 4 into 2 into 1 header as you would in the 4 into 1? No. The 4 into 2 into 1 has the primers the same, and that it would be, I'm just giving you for instance, these aren't actual real numbers without me checking them. The center 2 pipes, 12 inches to, that's 2 into 1, and then about 14 inches, and the outer pipes, 12 into 1 and 14 inches joining, and then that's the down pipe then. So that's 12 for the initial primary pipe, 14 for the secondary primary pipe, and then into the collector. And the collector is tuned as per, this is a memory. The guy that does the exhaust, and I apologize for not remembering your name. He does an exhaust program. Some of you will know. Answer this. So you can do the exhaust as per his program. However, his program only gives you the average length for a V8. Now, I got to call him because I've got the fix for that. Right? But I haven't done that. That's just one more thing to do. Groundhog Racing LLC would be worth connecting to. Have your cam manufactured. To have. This isn't a cam that I'm talking about that lopes. It's a loping device, not a camshaft. Nothing to do with the valve train. Have you and Ed Smith ever got together on Engine Talk? Both legends. You know, this Ed Smith sounds like I should know him, but I do suffer from a memory problem from my brain surgery. So I had to stop and think what it was. Andy, hope your daughter's doing well. Yeah, Andy's daughter's ill. So bless her soul. I hope she's looked after. Quick FC7. Aggravated progressive. That's what I have. ZX10R. Now, take it that's the transmission there. Right. Floyd's carriage. I like the story about how Ed used Olds pistons and a Dodge crank in a Chevy. We are talking about young Mr. Iskandarian, are we? Bless his soul. I'm still kind of emotionally depleted over that. It's like, until recently, I expected him to be there forever, so I could always call him whenever I want. Let's see. God will provide. Yes, that's right. Then you know. Right, that's the last word. Still no one's called. Okay. Now, any of you got, I think I finished what I wanted to say on exhaust systems, right? Well, no, I didn't. Exhaust system length, if you've got an engine cammed for a certain RPM, the exhaust, and you've got your exhaust, your camshaft right, then your exhaust system the right or wrong of the lengths becomes more beneficial. On a big block Chevy, a 6-inch change in length, putting it so that they're all the same length, is usually +6, -6 at with a peak torque at around about 4,500 to 5,000. That's 30 horsepower up the top end, and it's 30 foot-pounds at the bottom end, all because the exhaust is right. Now, how did I test this? To make sure I got the best regular exhaust possible, as a baseline, I called around several racers who did well with their gassers in bracket racing, right? They got the best times, and the headers that worked best were the company owned by Edelbrock and Comcams, been around a long time. And that was one of the cheapest. And the other one to work was a custom built one by some other company, beautifully made. I mean, this was a high dollar one. The expensive one just made a couple of horsepower more on our 750 odd horsepower test engine. It was small. It was like 2 horsepower. We had to average them out. So, and they were tested they were tested before, after, and before, right? So the best value for money was the, God, I can't remember it. Hooker. Can you forget that? Best value for money, not the best made, but if we're talking about function, that Hooker header was the one we found after a lot of chatting with people who had dynos and run these engines, and then finally a short selection on our dyno. The Hooker one, best value for money, and this other one was a stainless one. God, it looked good. Was better made, way more money, and slightly better horsepower. So if you've got an unlimited budget, hey, if you've got an unlimited budget, you'll do as I'm going to tell you. Anyway, that's the one we tested at the University of Northwestern Ohio. I was up there to do a seminar for the students there, and we did a project as well. And this also was combined with an engine master shootout deal. Anyway, so we had the best regular header we could find. That's what we use as baseline. And the 4-to-1 uneven length headers, the difference plus or minus was 6 inches as it happened. That 6 inches was due to the RPM we were tuning at, right? If we'd have been tuning at, say, 8, it would have been different, right? So that's the difference in length we're looking at, and the difference in power is percentage-wise is very noticeable. You know, if you were on a drag strip, boy, it sure would show up. Anyway, what else can I talk about here? Not really. Okay. Hoost 3056. Now, okay, I've got an email from you, and it went into my junk mail. So I don't know what it said, but I remember when I checked junk mail, I saw it and I didn't know what it was. So I've got to check that. No. There's some very productive things that can be done with exhaust systems on turbo engines. First, having a very high flowing manifold is very useful, right? And I'll tell you how useful it is. I had to do a turbo engine for Chrysler. And the idea of this turbo motor for the pushrod Avenger engine, the Avenger GT, is going to be the Turbo Avenger GT, was to be the Chrysler performance equivalent to the Ford Lotus twin cam Cortina. Because although Chrysler had the Tiger, it was a 2-valve cast iron headed, bulletproof, normally aspirated engine, which could not, in production form, meeting all the emission requirements, compete in an off-the-shelf manner to the Lotus Cortina twin cam. So they said, could I do a turbo motor for them, right? And I had at the time a £300 price tag on it as per the showroom floor. That means the GT priced, the turbo should be no more than £300 the price of the GT. Right now, back in those days, that was quite a big sum to work with. But to build a turbo motor back then, and it had to have no discernible lag, it had to be able to pass emissions, etc., etc. Everything a production wanted. Well, there wasn't a budget there for wastegates, which, by the way, for the money they would cost back then compared with the standard of living and now, wastegates were damnably expensive, right? So I ruled that out. But I actually made a wastegate, or something which worked as a wastegate. It was a washer about 2¼ inches diameter with a hole in the middle. That controlled the boost. No wastegate. That washer was like 2 dimes, even in today's money, right? So that cured that problem. Next, sizing the turbo. You do not want a turbo which has got way more capacity than the horsepower you want to do, right? So, and let me tell you why the exhaust is important. Because if it's got free flow, it will spin the turbo up quicker. Now, when I did a steady throttle, wide open steady throttle thing, right? Started at 1500 RPM in second gear and nailed the throttle. By 2000, it was showing about 2 pounds a boost. By 3000, it was more like 8. By the time it had got to about 3200, it was showing about 16 pounds a boost. Now, the cam for it was very short. Although it peaked, now the other thing I had to do is curve over at the top. I had to get peak power at 6.5. And that, it took a lot of juggling between the dyno, my, in quotes, wastegate, and the intake and exhaust ratio, housing ratios, right? And the cam. All of those had to be balanced. Now, over 2000 RPM, you had no idea the motor was turbo. No lag, no nothing. Boom, go, right? As for performance, if I put it in second gear and brought the RPM down to about 1000 RPM, I could put my foot on the throttle and the car would move off just like it was a regular Tiger, pretty quick. 4, what was then a 1500cc car. Eventually it became 1600, but the test one was 1500. And as it picked up speed, so you found you started going back in the seat, and it got more and more and more and more. And then the car started doing this. You look in the mirror and you could see tire smoke. It was going up in smoke. No banging the clutch in or anything like that. When the guys at Chrysler drove it, they were amazed. When their chief rally driver drove it, he was overwhelmed. We went up a 1 in 3 hill, and 1 in 3, and he said he couldn't believe he had to use the brakes going up a hill that steep. Right, when we got to the top, you could still see the tire smoke hanging up over the road. Right, but we had so many turns in it. Now, that had no wastegate. That was attention to back pressure. When you have a turbo engine, back pressure is your worst enemy. What you need to do is to get the engine so that it has more boost than back pressure. And this one did. It didn't get to be back pressure more than boost pressure until around about 5,800. Then it built up, and that's what caused the power to curve over. So I don't know quite where we were going on there, but your turbo exhaust is more concerned with flow than it is lengths. I say more concerned, but that's not totally so. If with a 4-cylinder engine, if you split the 2 cylinders, do a 4-into-2 intake manifold, exhaust manifold, and you join it in a dual housing at the turbo housing, then you can separate those pulses so that they hit the turbine more effectively than they do as a flow. You know, the exhaust turbine sees it going whoosh, 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 instead of whoosh all the time. Now, here's the thing. The Cosworth Turbo had an exhaust manifold that was about, let's come back a bit, about so long. 4-into-2 and 2 right into a split housing. They had very good low speed response. I mean, once you got to around about 2,500, you really didn't know it was a turbo motor. But they did have a wastegate as well. But they were very responsive. Love those engines. Very responsive. Right. Anyway, does that answer the question? Hope it does. Oh, yeah. You mentioned you made more power with flat top pistons. That's a generalization, right? Sometimes what you're trying to build can't be done with flat top pistons. But an ugly crown can cost you power. Now, something I've noticed, and it may be just my imagination or not, but it seems that piston crowns with current day fuels are less fussy, a little bit less fussy than we see with fuels of yesteryear. And I'm talking about 30 years ago now. My late friend, Carl, best man at one of my weddings, sounds bad, doesn't it? We did a project together where we built a cup car engine, which was almost state of art at the time, right? And I'm trying to think back. This was probably late 1980s or early 1990s. And it was the era when there was no compression rules. So we built an engine with about 15-to-1 compression, 350. And we realized that there was a lot of intrusion into the combustion chamber by the piston. So, dyno test. Now, at the time, a good power output for a 350 Cup car of that era was around about 575 horsepower, 580. That was an all-out cost no object motor. Well, we couldn't build a cost no object motor, but we got all the important things on it the way we wanted, right? Good crank, good piston skirt design, rings, etc., block, what you name it. The only thing that we had fixed was it was I think it was 15-1 and a lot of piston intrusion. Well, that sucker made 380 horsepower. Torque was terrible on it. I mean, it was like 1.1 foot-pounds per cube. Drastic. So the heads came off. Now remember, this project was to see what the piston burn looked like. The heads came off, and the piston burn was very in very isolated spot. Can't remember where it was now. But the clean wash was mostly on the highest part of the piston. We could see that it was a wash because in a way you could see some of the fuel runoff into where it burned. So anyway, I know a lot of you are going to go at this next bit. We took a big rasp file, put some grease around the top of the piston, brought the pistons to the top of the bore, put some grease around them and filed those suckers off and progressively lowered the compression. Well, we got down to about 12-1, right? And when we'd optimized it at 12-1 and almost, well, at least 3/4 of the dome gone, 551 horsepower. So you're going to watch that dome. Now, having said that, I believe from my experience with modern fuels that for the last probably maybe from 2010 on, the fuels have been more ignitable. It might only be a small amount, but something like that can make a big difference. For instance, we run 87 octane fuel in motors that 30 years ago would have detonated themselves to bits on the 30 octane fuel we use. And we are using 30 octane fuel in 10 and 10.5-1 motors. At about 11-1, they start telling us it's too much. But before you go saying, oh, Bizard said we can use 11-1, I'm not dyno testing parts that are thrown together ad lib. They are all the subject of intense, what's the word I'm looking for here? Investigations and years of experience, right? I'm going to make a bet now. Your average guy puts together an 11-1 small block Chevy and dials it in for maximum performance and that. It'll detonate. On the other hand, with all the little tricks I do at 11-1, it's still a tad off detonation. I can run 2 or 3 degrees too much timing on it for best power before it starts detonating, right? So that's where you have to get the build right. Okay. Hey, you helped me so much. Thank you. The truth hurts, so cry about it. 71. How do you remember to write all that down? Anyway, I think maybe it's because the added 10% ethanol in today's pump gas. Yeah, but a lot of time I don't use ethanol added fuel. But that's partially a reason. Yes, Floyd, cutting the top off one head and putting it on the bottom, it's harder than it looks. I have done a couple now, and I'm about to do another one. Or should I say two? No, it could be four, because you've got to have, you can't do it with one head easily. Now, I'm working on a method where I may be able to do it with aluminum head, with one cylinder head and a plate of aluminum, 1/4 inch aluminum. So that'll save two heads. And I might be able to do it more accurately, but I'm in the process of doing that. You guys will see how it's done down the road. I'm putting 305 heads on a 350, aiming for 400 pounds-foot on 93 octane. Now, that's not impossible. You've just got to make sure that you have the right lobe centerline angle, and unless you port those heads and put bigger valves in them, you won't get that. You'll have to short cam it with a lot of lift, right? Those 305 heads only flow about 160 on the intake. That'll only support. If you want any decent horsepower, you've got to deshroud the chambers, put in a bigger valve, deshroud the chambers appropriately, clean up the ports, do a good bowl job on them, make sure you get the exhaust flow as good as possible, run a compression ratio of 10.5 to 1, put a 108 or 107 lobe centerline angle cam, and you'll be looking at probably around 335 to 350 foot-pounds, depending on what else you did. If you're looking more for torque, please go for a Edelbrock air gap dual plane intake. Lone Rancher. Ever fool with the Oddfire V6? Yeah. I helped work on the fastest Oddfire V6 in the world at Bonneville. Smokey and I both did heads for the engine. So it was a shootout between the two. Bigger into, Charlie, you don't mean a bigger fast exhaust in terms of exhaust valve size. I take it you're looking in terms of port size, high energy port, right? I think you might have confused Andrew there. You want that 1.6 valve for sure, but you don't want a big exhaust port. You want that thing to have good anti-reversion and good flow, so that the kinetic energy contained in it is high, right? I think Charlie's trying to avoid getting too technical here. I know where he's going to on this, and I totally agree, but he's not about to write a page and a half and explain it here. Maybe on one of our members-only phone-ins. CR and LSA selection at higher elevations. The lobe separation angle or centerline angle won't change, Bob Jim, with altitude, as far as I can tell. The compression ratio, you really need, if you're always at high altitude, you really need to put that compression ratio up, right? Because whatever you get into the cylinder is reduced, so you better squeeze it hard. Now, let's see. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for the reply. Yep. Well, you got it there. Dick Maskin was another guy. Yeah, he sure was, right? I knew Dick from about 1976 until he passed away a couple of years ago. Very unusual guy, very talented engineer by intuition, right? However, very stubborn as well. Ray Baker. Yes, I knew Ray. He also was pretty hot stuff on oil pans, right? That was directed to Lone Ranger. What else do we need to know here? Oh, I did want to say something. I'm just getting ready to put the pan on my dyno mule 350, and something occurred to me. Now, I don't know how relevant it is now, but when I first came over here, I managed to ruin the bearings on a Camaro, the main bearings and the rod bearings, right? And it was a loaner. And they said, oh, you can take it to the track and test it if you like, right? So I went to the track and drove it like I drove my race car, which was 99.99% of what it was capable of. And I tell you, there's a couple of other stock Camaros over there. They couldn't even stay close to me. And I'll give you a dial on it. One of them was an IndyCar driver. So it's not like they were amateur drivers. This is a pro driver. Anyway, after I'd done about a half an hour, I happened to look at I'm halfway through a bend and I'm very used to the track. And I am literally screaming the tires and the back's just hanging out and I can see tire smoke all the way through this bend. And I'm doing about, I don't know, 110. And I just happened to glance at the pressure gauge and it read 0. And I thought, holy shit. So I coasted in, right? And stopped, let the engine idle, and it was 0. And I could hear it sounded a bit knocky. So I just revved it, boom, like that. And when it got to about 2000 RPM, I saw a bit of pressure come on it. And I thought, uh-oh, main bearings and big end bearings gone. And anyway, I told the guy, and he said, well, I've gone around that track and I've never lost oil pressure. And I said, well, I did check the oil and it was right up there full, you know. And anyway, and this must have been about a year later. I got one of the engines out of a car like that from the wrecking yard. And when I pulled the pan off, it was one of the early pans that had no baffle in it. Now, I don't know how many they put out like that, but I destroyed that engine from the Coring G's from 1970 tires. Where are we now? Do you realize the tires you buy now, the high performance ones, are better than the race tires were in 1970? Now, I'll tell you what, if you're going to build a small block Chevy now, do not put a pan with no baffle in it, right? No baffle. Let me show you the minimum you should have. Let me get the pan. Ooh. Hold on, folks, I'll be back. Here, this is your minimum. Also, this is only the second from lowest priced pan from Summit. God, I've lost my breath. And I say that's the minimum, right? I am not going to drive a 350 on a road race course with good suspension with just this, because I know I'm going to ruin the main bearings. Now, there's a pan. Oh God. Let me get back here. There's a pan that's made by Moroso. A road race pan. It's barely any deeper. It is deeper, but barely any deeper than a stock pan. It's got a cutout at the side and it's got trapdoors inside. It is not an expensive pan. However, it's not a cheap pan compared with that. I think I paid $58 for that pan. Nice pan. I don't know how consistent they are, but that one fits just like that. So look in Summit if you're looking for a pan. That's the minimum you've got to get, is one with baffles like that. Now the Moroso one was very good on the absolute stickiest race tires at VIR. No oil surge, right? Zero. And this was in a very similar Camaro, actually slightly older version of it. So you have been warned. Now, I don't know how well that pan I've just shown you holds out on the drag strip, right? I am thinking that it probably works okay, but do yourself a favor. Just get a bit more baffling than that from Moroso, right? It's just a pain in the ass to change the pan, and you might have ruined the engine. If you want to avoid ruining the engine, should you get oil surge, put some of that oil extreme in. Guys, I've promoted this oil extreme before. Let me tell you something you need to know. That stuff worked so well when I tested it, unlike any other additive I've tested, that I bought $18,000 worth of shares in it. Now, ask yourself this. Do I look stupid enough to spend $18,000 of my hard-earned money on something that doesn't work? And I'm the guy with the dyno. I could have put that $18,000 into any other oil additive if it worked. It didn't. There was only one other additive that I worked, and there's a strange story there. The guy who invented it, and I tested it for him, and it worked really good. And he said the last thing he was going to do was get into the automotive business. He said there's too much Jekyll and Hyde bullshit in it. So what he did was use it as an additive in air conditioners. Guys long ago retired with millions in the bank. And he didn't even have to advertise. I can't remember who it is. And the one guy I could have asked, unfortunately, has already passed away. Let me tell you, getting old is not much fun. The older you get, the more of your friends you lose. And that's always oh, I made trap doors out of hinges. Oh, yeah. Great stuff. Yep. I'll tell you what. Do a drawing of what you did, and then next time we have one of these, I'll put a photograph of it on. Do a drawing, or if you've got a picture, or explain it more. That's absolutely the way to do it. Floyd on intake. No, I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about there. The Turbo ZX10R was the first thing I've ever rode. Needs a Rave oil pan, right? Is that a brand name, Rave? I don't know that one. Bob Jim, LSA selection on a 499 cubic inch inline valve heads with 2.2 intake valve. I need the compression ratio. I can't do a lobe center line. No one can do a lobe center line angle without the compression ratio, right? 400. Now, this is a big block, I assume, right? Because there's another factor comes in, the valve inclination angle, right? Aggravated professor. Now, Mr. Aggravated, I notice you're asking me very specific questions here, which could be answered for members. I can spend time with members. They are paying for it, right? And I'm quite happy to spend whatever time it would take to get your setup right. If you're a member, and you've got to be a member, if I'm answering your questions, you've got to be a member for 6 months at least. Not before I answer your questions. I'll take your word for it. You will be. When you get to 6 months, you get that book that I talked about free, right? And that will either be the cylinder head book or the How to Build Horsepower book, signed by me. So it's worth $100. So, what have we got there? Bob Jim, have you ever tested Schaefer's racing oil? We're getting into a situation here where I have to say I can't discuss it. It's client privilege, right? The client is not so much Schaefer, but the company that blends the oil for him. You know, these companies that sell oils very often don't have the equipment to blend them, right, in vast amounts. So there's companies out there which you tell them what you want your oil to contain, and they blend it and bottle it for you. Now, I'm currently involved in some stuff in terms of oil blending and the industry, which, if I mention one, it impacts something I should have kept quiet about another one. So I'm going to have to bypass that. But I have this sneaking suspicion that Schaefer's oil is very good. That's about the limit of what I can tell you. Someone said to run a high pressure oil pump to keep more in the pan. The guy I know says no, use a high volume. What do you like? Well, a lot of old wives' tales are going here. If we're talking Chevrolet, I rarely use anything but a stock pump. Neither high pressure nor high volume. What I do is I modify the pump, a regular pump, to make it more efficient. And that gives me a pump which I can get the pressure from and more volume from and more efficiently, and it takes less horsepower. I show how that's done in a video that I did about 4 editions ago. I think it might be episode 230. Sorry, 203. And it shows how to modify the pump. Look, I've got one here, as it happens. The body modified. Now let me hold this up and see if you can see it. Right. Can you see inside there how these corners here are all knocked off, and down there it goes into the there's a radius on here. Here it's funneled in, right? Let me show you the other half. It's more on that. Now, without changing a thing, the before and after on that pump. Here's the cover. See this now, this isn't super important here. It's this bit here. See how it's let's see. See how this is I can't get used to this reverse effect done here all the way through there. I don't know if you can see that, but that increased the flow of that passage by 30%. That means that's 30% less work the pump has to do to get oil into it. Also, a very simple mod here that allows you to. Now, I want you to look at this and see which side I've done it on. What I've done here is turn this lip up. See? Just there and halfway down there. This allows oil to more directly go into the pipe, which goes across here. This pipe here. You come out. Now, you can get these with a 1/2 inch or I don't know, 5/8, a bigger pipe. But that doesn't do anything if it can't get past here. Now, this here, in practice, will allow more oil to come through here, right? It's only a little bit, but, you know, when I was doing some pump testing, it worked, right? Doesn't cost you anything. Now, as for the high pressure pump, they take about 4 horsepower more to drive them. As for the high volume pump, they take about 4 horsepower more to drive them. Mine, I don't know. I reckon it takes about 1 horsepower less. Not a lot, but I can get up to 70 psi with that pump and adequate volume, even with race clearances that are big because the cylinder pressures are very high and you need high pressure. So the gaps are big, so the volume's up. Never needed anything but a pump like that. Now, the latest pumps, note, have a spiral gear, right? They are the ones to get. Modify the ports like that, but those pumps do make more power because there is less ignition scatter with them and they pump more efficiently. So that's where I'm at on that. Oh, thanks, Stepside Deluxe. Right. I believe you were the 5th member of my members only, right? Stepside Deluxe. I am just wondering if you've got a nice truck to show me in your when you contact me, right? For any reason, because it sounds like you, with a name like that, you should do. Anyway, I'm buying a marble plate flat to within thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s to hand sand heads and deck. Good or bad idea? Waste of time. Waste of time, right? First off, you can have the heads too smooth. They don't hold the gasket as well. If you've got a finish where you can just feel with your thumbnail, just not like that, but just feel it. And you can see the grooves on both the head and the block. That's about the best that you'll get, right? Lapping it, no. What you can lap on that is get your rings so that they are, or ring grooves in the pistons, order them so they're slightly too small, i.e., instead of having about 1.5 thou clearance or 1 thou, they just have nothing. So you can just push them in, but they're tight. then lap them until they slide in easily with about a half a thousandths. That's what we did on our pro stock stuff, right? Oh, and the other thing is when we lap them in like that, put them in, they couldn't do this. And we found that the ring grooves, the wear almost went away, right? So we've done this on long distance engines. And so it's worth doing, but time consuming, right? Very time consuming. Yeah. 5/100ths of an inch flat, eh? Someone should sell quiet superbike exhaust. Would there be a market for them? If someone wants a quiet exhaust, tell them to call me, right? Had plenty of had plenty of experience designing high performance exhaust, though not necessarily for motorcycles, but I'm sure it's just another challenge. I remember sanding heads 18-1, no gasket, gas CB 1100. No head gasket. Well, there's no disadvantage to a head gasket, but really, I think it's quicker to put an O-ring groove in, right? And use a copper ring. That's what I do. Although I remember getting a piece of glass and sanding when I was a kid and using coarse emery on it and sanding down a two-stroke head for my 50cc bike motor, right? Never again. Okay, Patrick says the pump story was episode 205, zero cost hypo oil pump upgrade. Let's see. I would think with a good grit sandpaper on a machine flat surface would be good enough to true up a head gasket surface. Well, yes. If you're handy with what you do, I mean, there's been times when I've had to get junk engines, and whether I liked it or not, I've had to make performance out of them because that's all I had. And blocks, I've got a straight edge, and I've sanded those down with a block of wood and emery. Very exhausting, but that's it. That's all I had. Now, cylinder heads, clean up with that, fine, but don't go trying to cut them down for an increase in compression, because even the smallest ones will take you forever, right? Like I said, it was bad enough doing a 50cc two-stroke head, but not a big one. Jim, I've had 20 to 45 horsepower gain and increased peak numbers, 500 RPM on the dyno with only changing the oil to Schaefer's. Really? Okay. I've got to look into that, because what oil were you using before? Because I think you may not have been using a good oil before, but I know the Schaefer's oil works. That's because I knew what was in it. Can't remember what it was now, but it's a good oil. However, they could have changed it since. I'm going to look into it. Copper gasket was, yeah. The nice thing about copper gaskets is they can be made to conduct heat. So the cylinder head runs cooler with copper gaskets. And of course, the barrel runs hotter. Oh, yeah, that's a desperate move. I've seen a guy slide the head against sandpaper on a flat table. Yes, if you're very careful about it, you can do this. I might do it on a head that I own, or I might do it in front of somebody who wants me to do it and is prepared to understand there's a risk. But I wouldn't do it for a client, right? If they come into my shop, they'd be able to afford to have a proper uh, machine job done on the cylinder head. RD22. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Oh, okay. Floyd's Garage. The Schaefer's, I heard you have to change a lot. No, I haven't heard that. Bob Jim 12F. Unfortunately, dynos do lie. It depends on who's operating them. Right. I got a story there. Right. I had this guy who was a fairly well-known Trans Am engine builder, and he had a pretty big time sponsor. It was not a bottomless pit of money, but it was certainly a pretty healthy amount of money. And he was using a dyno over in California, north LA. It was in the valley. And this guy was a very well-known engine builder, right? Very well-known. He came out with a V12, beautiful engine. I went to see one demonstrated in a Mustang. It was a 2/3 scale Mustang with 600 horsepower V12. So he even sounded like a Mustang. And anyway, I can't remember his name now, but if I did remember, you'd all almost know. Anyway, he got this 302, and on this dyno, it made 551 horsepower. Sunday, he took it off that dyno, brought it over to my dyno, which was about a 70-mile drive, loaded the engine up, and the next day we warmed it up and it was all calibrated, and I did a pull. Exactly 500 horsepower. It was 51 horsepower less. So don't tell me dynos can't lie. And I said, look, I'm going to run the calibration, and you will see my dyno reads exactly the same as Cosworth's dynos, right? All of them, right? I said, the guy that you went on his dyno, it's reading high. Now, here's the funny bit. That guy got mad at me, right? It was like, it's my fault. I said, all we did was move it. All we did was you moved it from his dyno to mine. I haven't touched it. And he was so upset, right? I mean, I can understand being upset, but why being upset at me? I never did anything. I just put it on the dyno. No, he put it on the dyno. It came off one superflow onto another one. It's exactly the same dyno, but mine was calibrated so that I knew my readings were right. So this bit about dynos don't lie is not, unfortunately, true. I borrowed Westec's dyno once, dynoed an engine that was a replica of one. And I said, well, that's fine. Yeah. And John Bechtel said, yep, that's working good. I said, yeah, it's fine, except it's wrong. He says, what do you mean? It's a good motor. I said, where have you got the zero set to? Have you tweaked this or that? Which way? Let me just check. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Let me check it. Well, no, I checked it, set it right. And guess what? Made 500 horsepower. Lake Speed Jr., great guy. Floyd's Garage response, great guy. I know him personally. He's come up to my shop quite a few times. Not enough times. He is just entertainment, right? The guy should be a well-paid professional comedian, right? And he knows his stuff. When it comes to oil, if I can't answer the question for you guys, he's the guy I call. What else? Elevation change. More compression. Elevation change needs more compression, right? And of course, if you live up there, you need that compression. But if you're having to go up and down, the main thing is fuel mixture. So a fuel injection system largely overcomes that. Carburation, no, they'll stand a couple of 1,000 feet, but after that, no. When I would test oils, I would be on the same dyno and the same day with no other changes but the oil and filter. That is good. Did you flush the oil through first? Because you can get remnants of oil additives without using a proper, very high grade flushing oil with whatever cleans out engine detergent. So that's something you've got to be careful of. Jack Henderson, dyno. See who this is. Oh, folks, I'm going to have to quit this call. I've got my daughter calling here. So any more questions? And with a bit of luck, I'll be on Friday night, 7 o'clock. So be there. Thank you guys for watching.